Hello, everybody. I am so happy to welcome our listeners, and I am extremely happy to welcome our guest, Pari. I've just been getting to know her a little bit because even though we've talked before, we never. I didn't really get to know her personally very much, and I'm not here to divulge anything about her. I just wanted to get to know her myself and say, "Oh, okay, where are you coming from?" So Pari and Evie,
Eve.
Do a program called Women in America, and I would love her to talk a little bit about that. But I want to tell you what our topic is tonight. So I'm going to read this. And it is: Does empowering women disempower men? Which a lot of men seem to think. Tune in as Pari and Beth debunk this myth. And I know we agree on that. On this episode, you'll meet Pari of the Women in America podcast, a delightful young woman with a lot to say. She'll be joining us tonight to talk with host Beth Green about how to counter the excuses for misogyny. Here's a peek. A lot of men in US society are reported to feel disempowered, depressed, and discouraged. And they probably are. And often women are blamed. If women were not going to medical school, rising in the workforce, working outside the home, men would be just fine. A lie. In this show, we talk about how women's power is men's power and what is really disempowering us all. If you've been hit with statements about women being the problem, tune in and arm yourselves with ways of countering the movement to suppress women yet again. So, to talk about this, here is my lovely guest, Pari. This is my first interview of somebody who I didn't already know. And so this is a historic moment because we just changed our show from the Lighting the Way show to Building the World We Want, and where I'm doing interviews. And this is the first time I'm using this technology. And thank God, for some reason, it's working. So, welcome, Pari, to Building the World We Want.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be making history with you.
You are. By the way, talking about making history, um, Todd made a short from our interview. Pari interviewed me on her program, and that was before I was doing interviews. And we had a 1 minute short, and just like 3 days ago, I started promoting it, and it has over 2,200 views and lots of likes. This is on YouTube. I don't know about anything else. Lots of likes and a lot of negative comments. But we were talking about the potluck revolution. But I wanted to tell you that it went over very well. And we just started because I'm still promoting it. So, um, Pari, what would you like to say about yourself to introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, hello, everybody. It's so nice to meet you all. My name is Pari, and I have been running the Women in America platforms for just under 4 years now. I'm a public health professional by day and a creator by passion. um, and I feel like I got involved in this work simply because I started to notice things in my everyday life, but the differences between the experiences that groups have, and wanted to just elevate that and make it so that, people were able to sort of see themselves or see their daily lives reflected online. And so the content that I create is mostly focused on advocacy and social justice. And even though our platform is called Women in America, we have a number of men supporters. So, I think that
Yay!
that's a testament to the fact that not all men believe the myth that
Yeah.
empowering women disempowers men.
I love that. And by the way, we already have a comment. Elizabeth says, "Ooh, interesting question." So so it's nice to already have a comment. I mean, we have people watching, but anybody who wants to comment on Facebook, please be sure you're on my public page. Granny rocks on, because if you're on the private page, you can write a million comments and I won't see it. And I'll see your comments on YouTube. So, yeah, Well, what impressed me about Pari was her clear thinking, her um, clear energy. It feels like she really knows what she wants and that she's going for it. And I really appreciate that. I appreciate
Well, I mean,
that.
that's very kind, Beth. I feel like the thing that I really want is actually just a world in which women and men have true equality. So, you know,
Well, but that's a good thing. You know,
yeah.
I think that's a really important thing. I used to be part of an organization called Wages for Housework. You probably don't know this because you only know a little bit about my history. And it came out of the 70s. Remember the 70s? I remember the 70s. I was in the movement in the 50s and in the 60s, and women were just ignored completely. I mean, the only women whose voice was ever heard is if you were the girlfriend of one of the main honchos of the movement. Otherwise, you were completely disregarded, and that was a fact. And even though I knew more about politics and economics and so on than the men did, I was always expected to bring the coffee. So I come from that period of time where it was just assumed that men would dominate. And I think that's really an important point. And Todd says, so great to see Pari. Great conversation.
Hi, Todd.
See, you already have fans out there. You
That's
should feel
very
very
kind.
comfortable, very comfortable. And so we I met a woman named Selma James, uh, who ended up not being quite who she seemed to be, but she had some brilliant ideas about women. And she spoke about the powerlessness of women because we didn't have money. And that's why she started the Wages for Housework campaign. It was about saying women do so much work that's not even recognized. And
Mm.
if we only got paid for what we did, we would have the power to leave a relationship where we're being abused or to express ourselves. And that's just a short version of that. And that was 4 years. I was the West Coast coordinator of that program. And Amy says, thank you for this great topic. Boy, people are welcoming you. So it was really bad. And the thing was that nobody questioned it. And so I got to live through a period of time where it was questioned, where the women's movement became very active. Women across the world were demanding rights and recognition and to be valued and have our voices heard. And when I got on the radio, because I was on the radio a lot in those days, people loved the topic. The phones it would just light up because we used to have radio programs and TV programs, right? And they would interview me, and the phones just lit up. The women were ecstatic, the men were furious, and they didn't even know that it was not cool to say the things they said. But I will never, I don't know why I'm telling you this, Barry, but I will never forget this moment where I was doing a demonstration where we were trying the government and business for pimping off of prostitutes and saying, here are women who are attacked because they're trying to get money for what other women are expected to do for free. It's kind of funny. And how much money they were making off it. But of course, the men never got caught. Only the women did. I mean, it's like you're still seeing it. The Epstein files. It just seems to go on forever. And so I had the government on trial, and this woman came up and she wanted to speak. And of course, I opened it up to people seeking. Then this woman spoke up and she said, "I'm 70 years old and I've been a slave all my life. No more." And so the hope that this fight gave women. And I think men need to hear that and understand how oppressive society can be to people who are the wrong color or the wrong gender or who are gay or whatever it is, how incredibly oppressive it can be and how we're expected to just bear the brunt. of all of that. And the moment that we start fighting back and the men start feeling like they're losing their status, and then all of a sudden they
Well,
get,
only some men. I
yeah,
think
oh,
that
I agree with that. I agree with some
yeah.
men, but a lot of
I,
men. Look at the young men now. Look at the Andrew Tate. Look at the Nick Fuentes. I mean, I'm not talking about a small percentage. I think men. I've been a counselor for since 1980. I know how men feel.
yeah,
That they
I think you're
so
absolutely
many
right.
men. Yeah, so many
Sorry,
men feel. Yeah.
I was gonna say that I think that men have been hurt by the patriarchy much more than they understand, right?
Exactly the point.
We have you mentioned Andrew Tate. That entire movement of people like him is referred to as the red pill movement, you know? It's a reference to the scene in the Matrix where you can choose either a blue pill or a red pill and go down two different paths. And the red pill phrase has now become associated with the alt-right male dominant movement. So much so that they've actually gone past what you were describing, which is to blame women for all their problems. And now they've actually ended up at a very strange conclusion where they say that if you are with a woman at all, that is somehow
Mhm.
homosexual behavior. Like it doesn't make sense. But I bring that up to say that the patriarchy preys on young men
Yes.
just as much as it does young women, but in two completely different
Yes.
ways, right? And I come to the table as a public health professional, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about this population level data and all of these trends that we're seeing. And every time I go online and I talk about all of the ways in which women and girls experience inequality in the United States, there is inevitably always at least one guy who comes into my comments and is like, what about the fact that like men commit suicide at higher rates than women? And I'm like, I'm so glad you brought that up because that is actually a direct example of the way in which patriarchy hurts men. Like men are so discouraged from seeking out community, right? Like
Mhm.
I often talk to I often talk to my girlfriends about everything. Like I have the most like wonderful, uplifting relationship with my husband.
Mhm.
At the same time, I also don't expect my husband to be everything for me because that's not realistic
Mhm.
between two people or even a relationship. There are so many things that I go to my girlfriends for support on,
Mhm.
or like, just like I recently became a mom to a lovely girl, and there are some experiences that come with motherhood that only other mothers can understand. And
Mhm.
so I want to be able to speak to those women about that, right? But my point is that women invest really heavily in female friendships because we are taught that it is not only okay, but also encouraged to do that. On the flip side, male friendships, and of course I'm speaking as an outsider because I haven't been part of like male friendships myself as a woman, but male friendships are primarily focused on what I would describe as like superficial things, right? Like they talk about sports, or they talk about the going ons of it in an office, or they talk about like when they're going to meet up and get together to just like shoot the shit. And they don't get to have those like really deep emotional connections with with people who are just friends because society punishes them from doing that. Like they are told that they are not allowed to express their emotions because it's weak to do that, or they're told you don't talk about these things because like it's weird, or these kinds of things. And I think that men are really suffering as a result of that because they don't get to be their whole true selves because society tells them not to. And then when you're feeling downtrodden and you feel like nothing's going your way, it's very, very easy to place all the blame onto a natural scapegoat that like society and the internet is handing you, which in this case is a woman. But I have the true privilege of being around with a number of men who are so secure in their own masculinity and so secure in their belief that taking care of everyone around them, including the women, actually also helps them take care of their self. that I'm able to see like the real impact of what it means when someone rejects the patriarchy and is able to sort of take a step back and think critically about it, right? And arguably those men are even more powerful because they have tapped into some a part of themselves that like other men are not allowed to,
Yeah.
access. So on the days when I get a lot of trolls, and trust me, that happens often. They're almost always men. They're almost always they always almost always associated with a particular political ideology, especially in this day and age. I remind myself often about like everybody else, about like like everyone else on our side who, even if they're not perfect, they are actively trying. They're actively
Mhm.
trying to go against the grain of a society that wants them to be a certain way, and I think that the men who succeed at that are actually rewarded for it in very significant ways because they are perceived by everyone around them as like a safe, protective space, like simultaneously safe and also protective, right? As someone who sees women in the same light that they see themselves. And so my belief, again, from my biased viewpoint as a woman, is that I think that it really behooves men to take that step, to take care of and to build up and to uplift everyone in their environment along with themselves.
Absolutely. I love what you said. I agree with you 100%. And I think it is because men have been so abused or intimidated or threatened or beaten or uh, by other men that they are afraid to appear weak. And
Mm,
because they're afraid to appear weak, like they're prey to the other men who are out there on the prowl against them, right? And they're afraid to look weak. And so anything that's associated with being female looks weak. So if they start to develop their own uh, qualities which are associated with being female, but I don't think they have anything to do with being female. I think men can be equally caring, equally loving, equally sensitive. You know, some of the greatest composers in the world were men. They had feelings. I'm listening, I'm talking about classical music. You know what I mean? You hear it. It's like, oh my God, they're just like me. I feel the connection. And by the way, one thing you might want to tell them if somebody says how many men, yeah, I can think it was 3 out of 4 suicides are men within a certain age group, but more women attempt suicide than men. More women attempt suicide, but they don't. They use pills which are not as reliable as guns, and men tend to use guns, so they're more successful in committing
mm,
suicide. So I thought that was really interesting. Another point, I want to come back to the wages for housework thing because it so fits in with, men have a right to breathe and live and be who they're supposed to be themselves and not to be dominated by these stereotypes or these requirements of a society like ours that say, oh, you have to make so much money. When women have no money, men have to make it all. And I saw this as, because I was in the movement, the that it was very hard for a man to go on strike if his woman wasn't working outside the home and making money.
that's
And
such a good
so,
point.
so it's just so graphic. It is so graphic. And like you say, I mean, we are stronger together. If the two of us are walking together and some bully comes along, we're much more likely to survive than if it's one in the front and the other one is dragging from behind.
Absolutely.
It
I
go
think
ahead.
that your example is like it's so poignant because not only does it make clear like what you would think is a super obvious conclusion, like if two of us are in this, the pressure on both of us is less, right? But it also points out like how existing structures have really taken advantage of and perpetuated inequity amongst
Yes.
society, right? Because
Yes.
like I think that like for example, when a baby boy is born, he doesn't have patriarchy ingrained in him, right? It is like introduced and
Mhm.
integrated, and he learns about it through observing the world around him. And even the ways in which things are messaged, like through ads or through
Mhm.
the language that we use, or through the kind of scenes that you experience in everyday life, is that women are less capable, women are weaker, women are a burden, all of this stuff. So in order for you to start thinking about women in a different way, you actually have to completely break through that mold somehow and
Yes.
experience like a different form of media and a different form of environment, even,
Yeah.
right? And until women were granted the legal right to work and the legal right to access bank accounts, it was even harder for a man to even perceive them in that situation because they had never been exposed to that concept in real life. It just seemed like this radical future possibility. So I think you're so right. And it goes beyond just like, okay, women need to be paid for their work. It is even, I would even go so far as to say, like, right now, for example, there is a deep inequity in the type of people that go into trades work, right? Like tradespeople are majority men, obviously because there's like physical requirements that you need to be capable of doing certain kind of work. But I think a lot of women get dissuaded from going into the trades because, one, there's high levels of sexual violence that they experience when they enter into
Yeah.
those
Mhm.
professions. Two, they don't earn as much money as their male counterparts, which is true in any industry. But again, like in order to make the demanding physical requirements worth it, you're like thinking about the salary. And if men can experience that, but women can't, it makes it less worthwhile. And then third, society is still painting women as like fulfilling a certain type of role, right? So even though now we are in the workforce and we do have access to bank accounts, even within the realm of that, there's like feminine roles and masculine roles, or whatever it is. Like I call them blue jobs and pink jobs, that are very much perpetuated. And so for someone to break the ceiling in an environment, they have to really kind of take themselves out of the exposure that they're experiencing at a particular point in time. And I think that that's exactly what the patriarchy does to men, is like it puts them into this tiny little mold,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And then especially if they meet partners or women that somehow sit outside of that mold, they start to feel like that person is threatening their entire universe. But in truth, the universe that they're experiencing in the first place is just this like little sliver of what's
Yeah.
even possible at all.
Exactly. I mean, why shouldn't a man wake up and say, I want to be a nanny? I love children.
Yeah.
It's the same. We have a couple of comments, and then, oh my God, there's so many things I want to say to you. Okay. James says, I am fortunate to be in a regular men's support group led by Beth on a monthly basis. Yeah, we have a men's support group, and they're
That's
all
good.
older. So, where we share what we are feeling and support one another to be more aware and accountable for our impacts on the people in our lives. Thank you, Beth. Well, thank you, James. It's true. I mean, but it's taken years of training, of constantly challenging men to go deeper because they start out with the superficial, and then, but once you go deeper, we're all the same, in so many ways. And Amy said, "Thank you, Pari and Beth, for your very thought-provoking discussion." Yay, Amy! Thank you. So, yeah, well, there are so many ways in which the capitalist society is run based on keeping the divide and conquer, keeping
Yeah.
people weak. And by the way, Para, you may or may not already know this, but in the US, there was a time when women were in the workplace, big time in the working class. And it was only the wealthy women who could stay home and take care, and they didn't even take care of their own children. They had their servants. um, I mean, women were working in factories, children were working in factories. And then during you probably know this, but I'm just mentioning this because it's because you didn't talk about the bigger time frame. And then, of course, World War II comes along, and then women are doing all of the jobs, including the male Rosie the Riveter, right? And then it was a very conscious effort when the war was over to push the women back into the home. And that's when the myth of the housewife really became this symbol in society that everybody was, was
Yeah.
supposed to be. And it's happening again, with the trad wife thing, and women are. It's like I think, how have we fought all this time for this? And when you see so many of the rights and freedoms that women had just being taken away, being taken to the like the right over our own bodies, uh, that the vice president of the United States would talk about women as childless cat ladies. I mean, it's unreal to see that thing swinging the other way. And yes, and it's obviously part of a whole thrust to divide us up and to keep everyone disempowered. Because if you think you've been disempowered by women, how many of you have really been disempowered by Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and all these billionaires who are taking medical away from men as well as women? We are all losing. And
Yeah.
those are the people who are victimizing us, not the woman who gets a job. But I understand from the male perspective, if they come in and they feel overpowered. I think a lot of men do feel overpowered by women, especially because their brains develop slower. And when they're in school, at least that's true in this society, the girls tend to do better than the boys. And they tend to be more socially adept. And it takes men longer for them to develop. And so they're already watching themselves. And then they have this also, they've been raised by mothers, even though they may be terrified by their fathers. Who's told them, eat your peas, put on your shoes? It's women. And there's a huge resentment against women that came out of being told what to do by their mothers. I mean, they're forgetting, of course, that their fathers also intimidate and beat them, but there's a lot of factors that feed into that make it easy for men who are not realizing how many things they're being impacted by, that they're really being impacted by the system, which in the last years, since the 80s, we have more and more wealth and income inequality. And of course, men feel diminished. Everybody is being diminished. And nobody is. I mean, you've got Bernie Sanders saying that the billionaires are doing it, but that's not what certain people are trying to promote. They want it to look like the problem is women. So anyway,
I
so I
think
don't. Yeah,
I would agree on certain points and offer counters on others. I think that the parental relationship that any one person experiences is so critical to forming their worldview, right? Man,
absolutely.
man or woman, irrelevant. The relationships that you experience with your parents or your caregivers or your guardians, whatever it might be, is really influential to the type of person you become in adulthood, and also the ways in which you see the world. And then if you choose to become a parent, the way in which you parent your own children as well, right? That absolutely is true. I don't know that I would not say that I think that have this inherent like resentment towards women. I think that what has happened is very much that, exactly like you said, we started to see like the little initial bursts of capitalism happen in like after the Industrial Revolution, right? And capitalism started to realize that in order for there to be this like multi generation labor force required to sustain capitalism, you had to also keep a population down in order to do that, because you had to keep people poor enough that they would want to continue to work every day of their lives until their retirement age, and that they're in order for them to stay okay with that oppressive system for decades and decades and decades, they also needed to be able to put their anger somewhere, right? And so I think that women were the easy scapegoat and were always framed as a scapegoat to start with. Having said that, I do think that newer generations of men, starting with, I'll speak for my generation, starting with millennials, have been working really hard to undo a lot of the propaganda, the patriarchal propaganda that has come in to spaces, right? And this isn't just my feeling. Like, there is a lot of data to show that millennial men parent in very different ways than
Yeah.
their fathers did them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they have higher emotional intelligence, they have higher involvement just in terms of hours spent parenting. And, my husband and I, we just completed our first year of parenthood. And I will say that while,
Congratulations.
thank you so much. There were some days where it was like
Yeah,
unsure if
I mean, you survived the first year. That's good.
yeah. What I was gonna say was that there are a lot of moments in that year where our relationship suffered because, you have less time than you've ever had in your life when you're a parent for the first time.
Yeah.
But the one place in which he never wavered was being an equal parent. And I don't think that, let's say the generations of women that came before me, I don't think that they would have had the privilege to necessarily make that same statement. And so I think that there is a lot of effort happening, especially amongst like actually informed, educated, empowered, like men who are empowered on their own are good at
Mm-hmm.
empowering other people, right? Because
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's kind of the nature of what happens when, like, if you're a happy person, you tend to influence the people around you to be happy. It's the same thing. So I go back a lot to the fact that, like, some men have it or do it and other men don't is very much about, like, one, exposure, two, perspective, and three, like, the active choices that they're making, right? I often
Mm-hmm.
think of, I know this isn't the country where we live, but I think about Sweden and how Sweden was one of the first countries in the world to introduce paternity leave as like a national policy. And that's, from like the realm of public health, that is extremely forward thinking. Like, they are acknowledging that, like, dads are parents too and should be providing even in the
Absolutely.
home, right?
Absolutely.
Right. But what happened was that the government of Sweden realized that even though they had offered this national paternity leave policy where people would be paid to take time off and go spend it with their families, men were not availing of it. Like, they were not
Mm.
taking this paternal leave. And so they did this whole like research study to try and figure out why. And they interviewed a bunch of men across multiple industries. And the overwhelming top line response was, well, like, it doesn't matter that it exists. It's like, how will people perceive me if
Yes.
I go take time off work,
Mhm.
right? And the people they were talking about were their own coworkers, which is funny because all of these coworkers are saying the same thing, and it's like,
Yeah.
so yeah, we have a problem. And so
Yeah.
then the government of Sweden did another super like modern move, which is they made it mandatory. They made paternal leave mandatory for every single company in Sweden. And so these men now were forced, I say that, forced to start spending time as parents, and were being paid for it. And it was a revolutionary policy because now, even though for the first 5 years of having that policy, it's just going to feel like a legal change, in 10, 15 years, what you're doing is changing the culture of your society, right? You're
Exactly.
completely
Exactly.
normalizing the
Right.
fact that men are also parents and therefore should be spending time at home and should be providing at home and should be doing all the same tasks that previously were only allocated to a mother. And I think that that is one of the many things that we are gravely missing in the US, is this,
Mhm.
like, the participation of our systems and structures in
Mhm.
destroying a culture of patriarchy as opposed to upholding it.
Absolutely. Todd said, "Wow, I didn't know that. Fascinating." Pari. Great to hear that they made paternal leave mandatory. Yeah, I agree. I wanted to say that, you talk about millennial men. See, the millennial men were brought up by the women who were in the women's movement. That there was already the change in culture. There was some permission from men. In fact, I think ultimately everybody should do what's really right for them. I mean, you may be more maternal than I am, and you're a man. You know what I mean? But it's breaking that structure that you're talking about. It is great because if men don't have the opportunity to discover, and I think this is a really important point that you're raising, if men don't have the opportunity to discover who they really are and how they really feel and how they want to relate, then they have nothing but pictures in their heads of the way their parents were, or not just their parents, but the way society is, or the images of John Wayne, or, I know that's a very old image, but, the men who are on, in the movies and all of that, that they don't connect to themselves. Pari, they connect to pictures of who they should be, and they are devastated by that. And I really believe that men who do commit suicide or try to commit suicide are often just trapped in believing they're not good enough because they can't fit the image that the paternalistic society has created for them. But they are not that either. The men who create these images are not that. And everybody is playing these roles, and they're all it's it and nobody benefits personally and emotionally, and we're not taking care of the needs of anybody. And I love that example, and but they're being proactive. That is a far cry from what we're seeing today. And it takes such courage and awareness to stand up to all the images that are in your head about who you should be. Like, I'm a woman and therefore I should be maternal. Well, I am a woman and I'm not maternal, but I'm
And I
very nurturing.
and I think that's perfectly fine, right?
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
also think that it's the same way that if men are told that if they don't fit into a mold, the same it's equally dangerous when we do that to women and girls, right? Which is why I
Absolutely.
think that the only thing that the patriarchy helps is capitalism. That's truly it.
I
There
agree.
I have been thinking about this for years and years, and I haven't been able to identify a single situation in which the concept of the patriarchy is actually it leaves you better off than if you eliminated it completely. And I I will say I want to hope that every generation that comes is better than the one before it. And I still do believe that. I think that it's hard for us to maybe see that sometimes because we're seeing a resurgence of like extreme conservatism across the US, right? But I try to remind myself a lot that it is still the minority of people in the US. Like it was only, even if we just go by election numbers, it was 77 million people. That is still the minority in the US. And I think that even though we are seeing amongst Gen Z men high rates of people self-identifying, high rates of like women hating rhetoric, I think that we as a society cannot abandon that generation, because if we do, we will simply be giving rise to a new generation of abusers who then raise the next generation of abusers after them, right? And
Yeah.
we've done too much work to break those cycles, to
Yeah.
allow that fight, to allow like to go down without a fight. And so
Hmm.
I think it takes a lot of intentional work. And I find also that I think now raising children in this world is even more complicated than it used to be, because I hear this from my parents and grandparents often, is that one of the reflections they have as having observed my brother and I grow up, they said that like that when they were raising us, they said it was a lot easier to identify or like limit who was influencing us, because it's
Yeah.
like it was mostly your
Mhm.
family circle, it was mostly the friends around you, that sort of thing. But now, because of the accessibility of the internet and because of social media
Mhm.
and because of the use
Mhm.
of tech in classrooms, you're you're arguably receiving more information from people outside of your family unit than you are from those inside, right? And so
Mhm.
I think that there is a lot of intentional work that we have to do. And in this respect, I will say that this is a realm I actually do think that men have more power in than women. Like if a young man has a very strong male role model, I think that is deeply influential to that man's future behavior as
Mhm.
opposed to a woman who's a role model, right? Um, and I think that that's just the nature of like you reference like the young adolescent brain. I think it develops in different ways and people respond to different things. And so we need many more positive male role models in our society, because
Absolutely.
that is unfortunately something we are severely lacking. And I say this not as a reflection of men, but I say this as a reflection of the men to whom society has granted platforms are
Mhm.
undeserving of those platforms, like
Yep.
Andrew Tate and so on. And I was reading a study the other day that said that when a new user logs onto YouTube, it only takes 3 separate clicks for them to start to be introduced to red pill content, right? And
Mhm.
we don't have, there's no like alternative to that. There isn't this like huge universe of people, of men online talking about all of the good. Like there are several, but there's not as many as there are talking about the
Mhm.
bad and the made up and like really pushing
Yeah.
this line of propaganda. So we need way more positive role models. And previously we could look to public figures for that. And now, unfortunately, all of our male public figures are fascist Nazis.
Yeah.
So we are in a point of
Yeah.
time where we really need to take stock as a society and say, what is the world in which we are introducing not just our young women to, but our young men?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to throw a few little dingers in for you. I'm sure you know this also, that men have been abusing women before capitalism. And I agree that capitalism takes advantage of it, but it's like, no, there's something that goes deeper, and which is kind of what I've looked at times. So I just wanted to mention that, but that would be a whole other discussion. Maybe we'll have another time. Uh, and the other thing about it is, while I know that men, I used to feel a lot more the way you're expressing yourself. I felt more sanguine about uh, men changing. But when I saw Tucker Carlson get up in Madison Square Garden and say that daddy's coming home and he's going to spank, you know, girls for being not good. He's not a Gen Z guy, I don't think.
No.
Uh, and the fact that so many Americans voted for a man who promulgated this kind of misogyny and racism tells me that there was a lot going on under the surface, and that they had permission to, go back, and to go back to some of the things that they felt before, because there's a way in which a lot of men, and I'm not disagreeing with you, you have an experience which I love to hear about, of all these great men. But, my experience is, yeah, but there's been a lot of suppressed resentment against women because of women's um, getting more powerful. I can't stand how women are referred. Women are nasty. Women are ball busters. Women are, and so many women took on that role of acting tough, like, killing dogs and stuff like that, trying to mimic men. And so I'm afraid now. I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm afraid that there has been more resentment stewing underneath that would even allow, because I would never have voted for anybody who allowed those kind of things to be said, or who said those kind of things, or the way our president has talked about women and men of all ages. And some women voted for that. And they said, well, we didn't really vote for that. We really voted for our pocketbooks. But I don't believe that, because I don't think that I could hear anybody speaking like that and vote for them, no matter what else they said.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I talk about that side of things every single day, right? I
Yeah.
repost like 3 times a day where I talk about the deep rooted misogyny. Like to this day, I will never understand how when he said grab him by the pussy, that was
Yeah.
not the end of his entire campaign,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I am also, however, not naive to the fact that America is a deeply racist and misogynistic place.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
has always been true. The people
Right.
who now in Trump's second presidency are like, "Wow, what have we fallen to?" I'm like, this has been the US the entire time. You're just
Right.
finally getting access to this information
You're
because it's
waking
affecting
up.
you,
Right.
right? Because it's affecting you. So I want to be clear. I absolutely believe that we are up to our elbows in misogyny, like violent misogyny. We are up to our like armpits in violent racism. That has always been true. Unfortunately, that is majority of the time at the hands of men, right?
Yes.
Even when men experience sexual violence,
Yeah.
99.9% of the time it is at the hands of another man. That
Yeah.
to
Yes.
say that
Yes.
to say that men are not the problem is not an accurate statement. Like that is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that men have been the problem and men are continuing to fight back against that group of men. Like and unfortunately in this realm I do think that men have to be the ones to make that change because for
Mm-hmm.
example like women when women are oppressed in a society and we start to like fight back via the suffrage movement via wages for housework via now like the Me
Mm-hmm.
Too movement whatever it is our progress is limited by men always, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
like the
Mm-hmm.
nature of living in a patriarchal society. And if you don't believe me, look no further than the Epstein files, the fact that we know that we
Yeah.
have a million documents about
Right.
this. We know that the president's name is listed in them because he has said that he has ordered his name to be redacted from them. And yet our entire Republican Congress is stopping the release of these files, right? That
Mm-hmm.
is a very clear example of how like when it comes to violence against women there doesn't seem to be a line in the sand for Americans. What I'm saying though is that my hope what I have experienced in my life and what I'm hoping future generations continue to is that more and more men start to
Yes.
reject this
Yeah.
norm and this ideology and
Yeah.
this concept because they're starting to see how in rejecting it they are actually opening themselves up to a much more fruitful existence than they would have had
Yeah.
otherwise.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. I don't think we really disagree about anything. If you look really at the bottom of it. I agree with that. And I think it's important. What, we could talk about this a lot more, but I know we should try to wrap up. But what I think is important is the point that it's poisoning and it's hurting men too. And they can't be doing it for us, because people, and Todd says, I am 61 and I am rejecting it. It is so much better. And he is. um, you know, people will only go so far to take care of other people because they're nice and they feel sorry for you. If people don't see their interest as being the same, is that we are united. Like we all want to overthrow an oppressive, exploitative system that turns us against each other and keeps us all impoverished emotionally, spiritually, and economically. And if men begin to realize that we need to work on this together, for their sake as well as ours. When men begin to realize how much they have been brutalized by men, how much they're afraid of men, how afraid they are of looking like sissies. I mean, that's like big deal, but that, oh my God, that they're going to be embarrassed, that they're going to look less than. I mean, how their lives have been so eroded, their souls have been eroded by these kind of attitudes, and that it's hurting them just as much as us, which we agree on. I think if we can do that, if we can bring that awareness more and more to men and women and gays and trans and all of that, this whole thing about, we haven't even got into about sexuality in this country is insane, um, and gender.
I mean, it's all rooted in misogyny, always.
Oh yeah,
So
of course, and and women perpetuate it also. Like, oh, he's going to take care of me. I want him to take care of me. I was brought up like that's the way it's supposed to be, but it never was. In my family, my mother made all the money because my father fell apart when I was a child. And so, I never believed in that, but I saw it in the society, and that women want to be, and you said it earlier, it was a really important point. You have to be willing to do things for yourself. So we all have to change. We have to be willing to take on things that we get scared about and say, oh, let him do it, and men have to stop being so embarrassed about who they really are and all of the aspects of themselves, and stop listening to all this bullshit. We're constantly indoctrinated, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, we're indoctrinated about everything constantly. The woman who was killed today in Minneapolis by ICE, they said she was trying to run them over, and you're looking at the video and she's driving away, and they'll say it, and they'll say it long enough so that they think somebody's going to believe it, and somebody will, but they have a reason to believe it.
they do. I mean, yeah, they do. But I think that that's where we come in, and are going to say the truth and the facts
That's right.
just even louder, even longer.
Right.
And, I think that today was a very good example of when they said, and like the final step was when the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and reject the evidence of
Yes.
your ears, right?
Right.
And my hope is that people are starting to open their eyes and starting to open their ears, but they're not going to do that unless they are aided along this like journey of theirs, because unfortunately they have been deeply indoctrinated, and
Yeah.
we have very much reached the point in our country where a portion of the country is legitimately in a cult. And so we have to walk them back into normal society somehow. I don't know how, but somehow. And that's assuming they aren't lost beyond reason, which sometimes I do think they might be. So, it depends on the
I
day,
know,
really.
I know,
And
I
today
know.
was an especially rough day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty bad these days. But that's why we have to build the world we want. We can't wait for some billionaire to say, "Oh, now we're going to have income equality." Although there are some who do. That's that God bless them. There are a few who speak up. And Todd says, we have the same hope as you, and we're seeing the same thing about the movement towards something better. Yes, and we are working on it. And we just have to keep saying it over and over and demonstrating in ourselves a willingness to be honest and to support one another to be powerful.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
okay, I better shut up now. Please give us a like or a love on Facebook, and give us a thumbs up on YouTube. And Pari, tell people how they can listen to your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. We are at women_in America on all platforms. And our podcast is called Women in America, and it's available on Spotify, Apple, and basically everywhere that you get your podcasts.
You can't get away from this woman.
Yeah, I mean, I got to talk to women in America.
It's great. Great. So thank you so much for being with me today. I'm glad we had a couple of little scuffles because, because it kind of broadens the conversation,
Mhm.
different perspectives coming in. But we're here really to get as close to the truth as we can and to support everybody to be who we can be. And I haven't given up that human beings are better than we seem, but
Mhm.
we need, you take a plant and you stick it in poor soil and deprive it of sunlight and water, and it's going to shrivel up and die. And what we're saying is, water it, for God's sake. Water it. Feed the part of humanity that believes in oneness, that relates, that has empathy, um, that is aware, and will just keep up the good fight. So bless you. Thank you so much for coming on and being with me tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye bye. And now we're going to have our outro music. Bye bye.